And some of the things driving that are, is it important to be close to our end marketplace, or is it closer to be, or is it better to be closer to our inputs, whether that's skilled or unskilled or otherwise. So that's part of what's driving where to locate. What country should we put operations in is going to depend on that sort of stuff. So I think we looked at internal and external, although I might be confusing this with another class. But so external economies of scale. So as firms get bigger, do we get some economies of scale? What's economies of scale again?
Increasing output, average total cost decreasing.
Good. We're starting to get that one hammered out. So average cost falling as the scale of production or the output is going up. Now in this case, with external economies of scale, it's the industry output that's getting bigger, right? And that's helping us. So if that industry output is going up because the number of firms within that industry is growing, we might start to get some of these external economies of scale, so that a company that provides an intermediate input to my production process has average costs fall because he's got lots of people that he can sell to, and so you get the benefits of that. So those are external economies of scale. Okay, what else can be beneficial for external economies? So this is getting into the concept of clustering. There's a couple of you in spatial economics right now where this is kind of a hot topic. So when firms get together, what are some other things that go on when they're in closer proximity to each other? Okay, so maybe some more opportunities. And where would those come from? I agree.
Clusters of inputs, like you can easily access outsourced inputs.
Okay.
We did the button example, special.
So there's just more there. Maybe even as you change, there's more variety, more ability to change things as needed, right? And then another big one is the concept of knowledge spillovers. So knowledge spills are the ability to communicate with other people and share knowledge. So we do that in here when I try to open it up for discussion, right? And the fact that maybe the more people we have, the more input we could have, or the more chance of there being knowledge that's shared between each other. It might not happen right away. It might be something that's informal rather than a formal setting. So you have a little lunchtime discussion. All right. So can you give me any examples of clustering? So the term for this is agglomeration. That's a good word. So glomming together is what I always think of with that word. So industrial agglomeration is the clustering of those, and we're sharing in those benefits of the knowledge spillovers, maybe some lower intermediate inputs. Can you think of industries where you see them grouped together? Some of my non-spatial people, since we kind of just covered this in spatial, but you can think in the United States. It doesn't have to be in Mexico or any place. Just where do you find groups of firms that do a similar thing and they're kind of clustered all in one geographic location?
Kind of like maybe the fast food places downtown?
It could be at a very local level, yeah. So we've got here in Ottawa, at the south end of Ottawa, we've got a number of the fast food places all kind of near each other, close to the freeway, which could be proximity for customers, as well as maybe it might help a little bit with input suppliers, probably less of that effect, but more to be close to the customers, so the location there. Okay, good. Other thoughts? Maybe outside of Ottawa or bigger. Clustering of activity of a geographic location. Think around the United States. There's lots of examples of them actually. Rug makers in Georgia. Okay, that's a spatial guy. Non-spatial. Non-spatial. I want my non-spatial people. So we got Taylor, Dylan. Who else? Gene already spoke. Ethan. Think hard. You can come up with it. Where do you go for entertainment? Where do you go for computers? Where do you go for Broadway shows? Where do you go for gambling? Where do you go for... Okay, I've given you enough hints. Tell me where you go for that stuff. Vegas for gambling. Okay, where else? Broadway. Where? New York. Okay. Where do you go for computers? What state? Not to buy. Think outside the box here. What if you're developing software? Where do you want to be? Where do you want to be if you're a software developer? You're a Google, you're a Yahoo, you're a California, Silicon Valley, right? San Francisco, that is the hub of the world for that stuff if you're a software engineer. And where are you going to go if you're an actor? Hollywood, right? All of these are examples of low, and then so you can kind of take that concept and go around the globe potentially looking for spots where there might be this ability for a number of firms to evolve. Even if there's a large number of firms, the industry growing together with a large number of firms creates these advantages. That's agglomeration. All right. So aerospace manufacturing in Seattle, Southern California, another one. All over the place. The rugs in Georgia, as was pointed out. Do you remember the percent in Georgia? That was a spatial. How much?
80-some%.
That wasn't that high. Yeah, I was close. I think it was 55. I'm not positive, but still a lot. So all the rug makers, those of you who aren't in there, so 55% of the national production of rugs goes on in Dalton, Georgia. 55% of the nation. We're talking carpets and rugs. Do you think that's in a few places, even in Ottawa? Do we have carpets and rugs around the world? Or 55% of the nation's volume of carpets and rugs comes out of one city in Georgia. 55%. So there's lots of these examples of clustering.
Warehouse of carpet and rugs.
All right, so industrial policy. What kind of stuff are we talking about? What kind of policy could you imagine a government doing? United States or Japan or Indonesia or Mexico or Argentina?
Like subsidies for new firms that we did with the wind initiative.
Yeah, the wind initiative would be one, right?
If you fail, we'll bail you out. Sorry.
Fail and bail.
I was going to say the auto industry. They supported that.
Yeah, and they could support it at the time of failure, but and then here we're probably thinking, well, no, that's not true. I was going to say I was thinking of examples anyway of getting industry started, but yeah, no, the auto industry, even existing big dinosaurs like GM, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, we might have tax advantages, tax preferential treatment. All of those things are industrial policies.
Anything that's protectionism at all.
Yeah, and how do they sell it to the government? How do they sell this stuff?
This is going to keep X amount of American jobs. It will keep us employed.
Right. And how does the non-economics politicians and general public respond to that? Does that make sense to them?
Yeah.
Yes, it does, unfortunately. Yeah, it makes too much sense to them, right? Oh, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. If GM comes to town and they hire, they have 200 employees or something, that's good. That can't be bad, right? Don't understand opportunity cost. One of the top things in economics. There's a cost to everything. What did we give up to pursue that? There was tax dollars used. There was missed opportunities elsewhere. Whatever. What else is going on to bring or to keep that industry alive? we start to get into the situation of governments picking winners and losers. Who picks winners and losers when there's not a government involved? And who's the market? The consumers, right? The consumers are king. If they like the product, they buy it. If they don't like it, they don't, right? If businesses think that there's enough of a profit and enough revenue to cover their expenses, which includes a normal profit at least, right? If they think there's enough, they enter that market, they start up a business. And if they manage to sell what they thought they were going to do, they win. If they don't, they lose. That's what happens. That's the free market system working. But cities and governments and they think maybe they can do things better through setting up tax credits. And I am guilty as charged for some of the, and I say guilty of it. I don't hold any individual proprietor. I don't shame them one bit. I expect them to go after what would be profitable if it's available, if it's out there and it's legal. I mean, do it. But I've seen it time and time again where it doesn't turn out as good as we think it might. We don't hire as many as employees. Or there's that many employees the first year, but then it turned out they didn't have that good of a business model, and the business is gone after a year or two, right? And so it's not good enough to get them there, and how in the heck can we even imagine local political people, city government, or county government, or state government, being able to say, oh, well, that looks like a winner, yep, that's a good idea, that'll generate jobs, and they start orchestrating that. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it has impact around areas around where that happens too. You know, like neighboring industries are going to be affected.
Mm-hmm.
Global issue.
But if one city's doing it, another city might have to do it to compete with them again. And so it's like we get into this little spiral of governments needing to do it to lure people to their city, as well as firms needing to do it because it's profitable. Okay, so let's talk about market failure. So, externality. What do you got for me?
Benefit or cost and effects of a third party and not involved in the transaction.
Good. All right. So, negative externality. Give me an example. Generic example. You know, it could be a real world example. It could be just a generic one. So, negative externality. So something bad happens to a third party not directly related to the transaction. Pollution is kind of the classic example of an externality. So if there's pollution going on during the production process, is that good overproduced or underproduced relative to what would be maybe socially optimal? It's overproduced, right? So you can kind of follow your gut feeling. Sometimes it'll be, it might lead you astray. But the market is producing too much. So here's the pollution example that you might remember from principles class. We got a supply and demand curve. The marginal benefit curve is the demand curve. The marginal cost curve is the supply curve. And so in a what are we making? Give me a good, any good, any good, any good. Plastic. Probably good enough. Plastic bottles. So we're making plastic bottles, and the cost of a bottle is embodied in that curve. The demand for bottles are embodied in that curve. So these are the private costs. but the social costs are higher. So society's costs are more than what the private company is bearing because of the pollution. The third eye or the coughing that goes on because of the pollution going in, whatever. So there's people that are bearing a cost called the external cost. And so you can think about it conceptually as shifting the supply curve, which is the cost curve, up by the amount of the extra cost that's not being paid for. The market is giving off, or is producing Q1, producing an exchange in Q1, which is more than what we'd like to see for society, the allocatively efficient quantity. All right, so that's our general picture of a negative externality. Positive externality, benefit. Somebody other than John, he gave us the negative pollution one. Positive externality, an external benefit that goes to somebody else, not directly involved in the transaction.
Technology.
How? That's a maybe.
Perhaps some sort of innovation becomes maybe. So like Facebook, I guess, you know, this for one
Okay.
day or whatever, and then now solar energy available to everybody.
Solar energy. So I've got a process where a company builds a solar panel and a person buys a solar panel. They get reduced cost at their home,
I'm talking about like
not an externality.
No, I'm talking about like environmentally.
Oh, environmentally, okay. So if there's,
Atmosphere,
yeah, so if there's, well, you're close. If there's a
It's an opportunity cost like deal. Because at that point, you have the opportunity to pollute that environment more with almost any other form of energy, but you choose not to. So that
the thing that you need is that usually solar's more expensive on the front end. There's a trade-off, right? So you got to buy usually most of this environmental stuff is more expensive on the front end, but it might help you on your utility bills long term. Solar's probably a good example of that, right? We're getting we buy a $10,000 gizmo to put on our roof, and it gathers the sun's rays and generates my power. I don't have to pay for it at my city bill any longer, right? So I've saved money. In order for it to be an external would be that extra effect if there's environmental, yeah, and so I'm with you. That's a possibility there. As long as there are some real effects to the mitigation to the environment. Okay, there's an easier example than that, kind of a classic positive, but that's good.
Probably public goods.
Like
Fireworks.
National defense.
fireworks, national defense. So we got multiple benefits going on to other people beyond. Yeah, there's some externality stuff there. That could be positive. The public good problem is slightly different than the externality problem. Education is kind of one of the classic ones, right? Remember that? That you guys are paying to be in your seats, but there's benefits accruing, so to general society, because we'd rather have more smart people around than dumb people, because dumb people tend to steal stuff and commit crimes, and smart people don't do that as much. They end up being a productive part of society, blah, 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 right? So let's have more people running around. All right, so solar panels, education, the market all on its own without being touched for some of these. Oh, I'll put education, but you can put your solar panels in, Adam, if you want. So the benefits here to society, the marginal social benefit is greater than what the individual is having. So if you guys are getting your education, you're willing to pay this, you're going to get this much education. We'd like to get more people with education. So the allocatively efficient quantity for society is greater than what's being currently produced and consumed in the market without any intervention. So that is market failure. You can see that the market doesn't fail to produce anything, potentially. That's the one thing I like to make sure you're aware of. It's just failing to produce maybe the most desired outcome, the socially efficient one, because of these external benefits or external costs. Okay. Here's an example. So the benefit thing or the cost thing can go onto the supply or demand curve, depending on if it's a consumption externality or a production externality. If we've got an output here, a quantity of a good, and these are companies and these are consumers, right? So it can go on both sides. So in this example, we've got knowledge spillovers. And so the benefits to society here, the social benefit curve would call for more going on than what is because of these extra, kind of like the education example, but here it resides in the firms. And so by firms clustering together, we end up getting these knowledge spills, these extra benefits. But they may not do it all on their own. In some cases, they might if they can learn about each other. And so maybe through an information sharing of some sort, they can start to cluster on their own. But that might not happen in every case. So our baseline assumption is that the private benefits and the private costs, the private benefits and the social benefits are one and the same if there's no externalities. So on the consumption side, that's kind of our baseline assumption, which is why we normally tout that, hey, good things happen if this is where society is going and this is where we end up is at this Q1. That's awesome. Because there's no externalities. The social benefits equal the social costs, no problem. The market system with the invisible hand is cranking out what we want it to crank out, the allocatively efficient quantity for society. But when there's externalities, this happens. And then we get either an overproduction or an underproduction of the good. Okay, questions on that? So we've kind of gone through multiple examples of the graphical setup here. So politicians use this to their advantage all the time, and so do companies potentially. But this ends up being a justification for those industrial policies. So it's like, oh, well, we're going to have knowledge spillovers, so let's do this policy to help fix it. So if this is the outcome here, let's go ahead and subsidize education by giving every student $2,000. If we give every student $2,000, then OU is going to get this price for education, and you guys are going to pay, the student's going to pay this low price, right? And the government's going to fund the difference with a grant going to you or a grant going to OU. It turns out not to matter, but we get the result that we want, that more people get education. That's applying industrial policy to try to get something accomplished. And with that previous graph, it's kind of the same way. All right. So strategic policy is a little bit different. We'll pick up there on Wednesday. This will be a little touch on some game theory topics whenever